Hollywood is a place where reinvention is practically a requirement. You move there, you change your name, maybe your nose, and if you're lucky, you make it big. Amie Harwick understood transformation better than most. She put herself through school, became one of the most sought-after sex therapists in LA, and even wrote the New Sex Bible for Women. But no amount of success could keep her past from catching up with her, because lurking just outside her well-earned success was Gareth Pershouse, a man who started as a boyfriend, became an abuser, and refused to stay gone. When their paths crossed again, nearly a decade later, it wasn't a reunion, it was a countdown. Today, we're talking about how one woman built an incredible life, helped thousands of people, and still couldn't escape the one person who refused to let her go. But before we dive in, if you like your true crime brief and bingeable, you're in the right place. Hit the follow button now for at least 2 new episodes every week. This is 10-Minute Murder. Let's get into it. Hollywood is known for its bright lights and red carpets. But on one February night in 2020, the focus wasn't on a star-studded event. It was on the lifeless body of a woman clinging to survival. First responders raced through the city's winding streets to an apartment complex where 38-year-old Amie Nicole Harwick lay barely holding on. Amie's journey to that moment had been anything but easy. She had been adopted as a child, and even from a young age, she understood that nothing in life was guaranteed, except the work she put into it. That second chance at life her adoptive family gave her, she took it seriously. She excelled academically, pushing herself through every challenge until she secured a spot at California State Polytechnic University, where she studied psychology. Helping people wasn't just a career path for Amie, it was her calling. But she wasn't waiting around for anyone to make things easier for her. If she wanted to build a life of independence, she was going to do it herself. Amie Harwick wasn't handed her education. She earned it one hard-fought step at a time. She paid her way through college by dancing, covering her tuition for her psychology degree. Then she did it again for her master's in clinical psychology, and again for her PhD. While some people took out loans or relied on family support, Amie hustled. Her work ethic paid off, literally. She became a marriage and family therapist specializing in human sexuality and intimate relationships. It wasn't just a job for Amie, it was her passion. She didn't just want to help people, she wanted to change lives. Amie quickly became one of Hollywood's most respected therapists, working with clients to rebuild their relationships and redefine intimacy. Her expertise landed her regular spots on TV and podcasts, and she even launched her own YouTube channel to share her insights with a wider audience. She put her philosophies into writing with the New Sex Bible for Women, the complete guide to sexual self-awareness and intimacy. Despite what the title may suggest, the book wasn't just about the mechanics of sex. It was about emotional connection, self-discovery, and breaking down societal stigmas around intimacy. Readers praised it for offering practical, meaningful advice that helped them reconnect with their partners on a deeper level. Amie never shied away from conversations about sex or the complex emotions tied to it. She had firsthand experience with the industry's realities. Her time as a dancer and modeling for Playboy had given her an inside look at a world that most only see through a filtered lens. In 2017, a series of suicides in the adult entertainment industry exposed a growing mental health crisis. Amie saw the problem and got to work, partnering with Pineapple Support to connect sex workers with critical therapy and crisis resources. The adult industry had long been overlooked when it came to mental health resources, and Amie worked to close that gap, making sure people got the care they needed before it was too late. While Amie's professional life was thriving, her personal life was about to take a dangerous turn. She was a fixture at LA's high-profile parties, mingling with celebrities, socialites, and industry insiders. At one of these events in the early 2010s, she met a photographer, Gareth Pershouse. At first glance, Gareth seemed harmless, reserved, and maybe a little eccentric, but charming and funny enough to make a solid first impression. But as Amie would soon find out, first impressions aren't everything. At first, Amie and Gareth hit it off. He was quirky, a little shy, but charming in the way that makes some people seem interesting rather than awkward. Amie, known for her empathy, was drawn to people who didn't fit the mold. But Gareth wasn't just different, he was dangerous. Over the course of their 18-month relationship, the charm wore off, replaced by violent outbursts. Amie filed multiple police reports detailing the abuse, beatings, choking, suffocation, and full-force punches. She had the injuries to prove it, documented in photos that left no room for doubt. She took every step she could to protect herself. 2 restraining orders were filed. Eventually, the relationship ended. Gareth was out of her life. With Gareth in the rear view, Amie moved forward. A few years later, she met comedian Drew Carey, and within a year, they were engaged. The relationship was different, full of love, laughter, and mutual respect. But even with all the right ingredients, it wasn't meant to last. They called off the engagement after a year, but they stayed friends. Drew would later describe Amie as a positive force in the world and an unapologetic champion of women. Amie kept moving forward, shifting between professional circles, raising awareness for mental health, and staying focused on her work. Then, at the XBiz Awards, a red carpet event celebrating the adult industry, Amie's past came crashing into her present. Standing in front of her was Gareth Pershouse, but instead of intimidation or confrontation, what unfolded was something else entirely. Gareth unraveled. He broke down in front of her, sobbing, shaking, hyperventilating. "Why are you here? Why are you here?" he screamed, his face contorted in anger and despair. Amie later described the encounter in chilling detail. Quote, "He recited text messages that I had sent about 9 years ago, recited the date, who they were to, and exactly what they said word for word. I couldn't believe it. I was very scared." To her mother, Penny Harwick, she recounted the scene in even starker terms. Quote, "He called her a bitch," Penny told 48 Hours. "He told her she ruined his life. And she said, 'Mom, I went into therapist mode. I just tried to calm him.'" For the next hour, Amie, someone who had spent her career helping others, did what she did best. She helped. Even though he had terrorized her, she stayed, talked, and tried to diffuse the situation. But as soon as she walked away, the fear set in. Something was wrong. Very wrong. Amie's instincts screamed this wasn't over. She installed security cameras, carried pepper spray, and made sure friends knew where she was at all times. She even documented her fears in private emails. Quote, "Tonight I felt very scared. It terrifies me that he's been obsessed with me for 9 years, thinks about me every day." The restraining orders that had once kept Gareth at bay had long since expired. Legally, there was nothing standing between her and the man who had fixated on her for nearly a decade. Amie did everything right. She took precautions. She voiced her fears. She tried to protect herself. But on the night of February 13th, 2020, someone broke into her apartment. Moments later, she was found, battered, strangled, and thrown from her 3rd-floor balcony. A neighbor, realizing who it was lying on the pavement, scrambled for help. He couldn't find his phone, so he ran to a neighbor's apartment, desperate to call 911. First responders arrived to find Amie still clinging to life. They rushed her to the hospital, but the damage was catastrophic. She didn't make it. It didn't take long for law enforcement, or anyone paying attention, to figure out who was responsible for Amie Harwick's murder. Just a month earlier, she had come face-to-face with Gareth Pershouse at the XBiz Awards. And it was clear to everyone that he was still obsessed with her. The man who had been once a footnote in her past had forced himself back into her story, this time with fatal consequences. On the same day Amie died, police arrested Gareth, now 45 years old, and charged him with her murder. He posted a $2 million bond and was released, but the freedom did not last long. When he pleaded not guilty, he was taken back into custody where he would await trial. 3 years later, Gareth finally faced the judge. His defense? He hadn't gone to Amie's apartment to harm her. He'd gone to talk. According to him, the conversation had turned physical, but only because Amie attacked him first. He was simply defending himself. And since there were no witnesses to say otherwise, how could anyone be sure he was the one who threw the first punch? It was a flimsy excuse, but flimsy was all he had. The prosecution didn't even have to speculate. Amie had left behind the strongest evidence imaginable, her own words. Her emails, written in the weeks leading up to her murder, painted a picture of a woman living in fear of a man who had never let her go. "He couldn't stop obsessing over me," she wrote. "He recited text messages that I had sent about 9 years ago, recited the date, who they were to, and exactly what they said word for word. I couldn't believe it. I was very scared. I'm pretty nervous that I'm more on his radar now. He's focused on harming me. I'm hoping that this interaction and listening to him and giving him time may cause a neutralization in his anger towards me." End quote. Amie had tried to calm him, tried to protect herself, and even tried to reason with his obsession, but none of it mattered. The jury didn't buy Gareth's version of events. He was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. A man who had spent nearly a decade fixated on Amie had stolen her future, but in the end, justice ensured he would never walk free again. Thanks for listening to this episode of 10-Minute Murder. If you liked what you heard, don't forget to hit subscribe and leave a review. It helps other true crimers find the show. And if you're craving more stories, but with a more mysterious twist, a weird vibe, check out my other podcast, 10-Minute Mystery. Thank you for listening to 10-Minute Murder. See you next time.